My wife chose the boss's dinner over our anniversary, so I left quietly, leaving my ring on the set table, which she didn't even notice. I waited until the candles burned out on their own and left, certain that our story ended there. There were no screams. There were no scenes. Only the muffled sound of disappointment and the emptiness of a simple yet definitive gesture. The silence that night was louder than any argument we could have had. It was her absence that screamed. The plate she didn't touch, the wine we didn't toast, the cake that was never cut. The empty chair in front of me grew heavier as the minutes passed, and with each second she wasn't there, I understood one thing more: she didn't choose me. For the first time, and perhaps not the last, she didn't choose me. When she returned, it was too late. She came in smiling, her perfume still fresh, her eyes too bright for someone who should have remembered what that night meant. She walked straight past the table, kicked off her heels like discarding crumpled paper, and tossed her bag on the sofa with the nonchalance of someone who hadn't expected to find a world crumbling inside her home. She only realized something was wrong when she saw the ring on the table. Hers was still on her finger, but mine, cold, lonely, like an end written in gold. She still tried to call me. But I was gone. Not in body, not in soul. That night killed me in a way that only those who truly love can understand. She thought it was pride. That it was drama. That I'd be back the next day. That the candles that burned down were just a whim of an overly sensitive man. But time passed. And I didn't come back. She cried for the first few days. She knocked on my door. She called. She texted. Then her silence began to scream again. And then she fell silent. And she moved on. Or at least she tried to move on. I cried too. But I didn't chase after her. Because those who love don't need to demand attention. Those who love shouldn't have to compete with meetings, dinners, or empty compliments. Those who love choose. And that day, she chose someone else. Even if it was out of vanity, neediness, illusion, or a cheap flirtation disguised as prestige. Her boss never loved her. I learned that later. He liked the attention. The power. The game. And she was a useful pawn for a while. A convenient distraction. But it was never destiny, never home, never love. Over time, she began revisiting that night. Every year. Always alone. Sometimes I lit a candle. Sometimes I left the table set, as if I, would still arrive. But I never did. Because while she was reliving a memory, I was building new ones. Little by little, I retraced my steps. One at a time. Timid at first. Cautious. Like stepping on the shards of a heart that still bleeds. But time also heals. And one day, without warning, someone chose me. Every day. Without needing dates, dinners, or souvenirs marked on the calendar. They chose me at breakfast. They chose me in midday texts. They chose me in the silence of the night. And I chose them back. Years later, she appeared. Her eyes were teary. Her voice trembling. A plea for forgiveness that took too long to arrive. But it still came. And I forgave. Not for her. For me. Because carrying grudges is keeping alive a pain that should already be buried. And I no longer wanted to live in the graveyard of broken promises. She cried. She hugged me. And thought, for a moment, there was hope. But I told her our paths were different now. There was no turning back. She wanted to argue. To beg. But in that moment, the penny dropped. And I saw, in her eyes, the exact moment her world fell apart. Not because of me. But because of her choice. Time passed. And she kept trying, little by little. A gesture here. A message there. But life had moved on. She was the past. I was someone else. Until, on her birthday, she tried again. She planned an intimate party. Invitations. Soft music. Expensive wine. She hoped I would go. That I would at least show up. But I didn't. And she waited until the end of the night. When all the guests had gone. When the silence in the house was the same as that last night of ours. When loneliness struck for the 1000th time, I sent her something. A flower. A single flower. The same one from our wedding bouquet. And a note. Short. Precise. Cruel. Maybe. True. Always. So you never forget what true love was. They say she held the flower as if holding a life. That she hugged the stem as if trying to stop time from passing. That she cried. Alone. For the flower. For the absence. For the love she herself destroyed. And there was no turning back. Because some loves, when broken, don't stick together. They only become memories. And it is in this memory that she lives now. While I walk beside someone who knew how to see me, choose me, keep me. But what exactly led that woman to give up a love that was there, present, willing, built? And how did time, that relentless judge, make a point of charging her every second of her wrong choice, turning pride into pain, and vanity into emptiness? The answer, perhaps, lies in that single flower. And in what it represented. Because sometimes, the greatest punishment for betraying a true love, is realizing too late that it will never return. Welcome to the channel. Here, no form of betrayal is romanticized or justified. The stories are fictional, but based on real emotions, and serve to show how wrong choices can destroy the most precious thing, true love. Brace yourself. What you're about to hear is a powerful, striking, and unforgettable story. Take a deep breath. Because this one will move you. Lucas and Mariana met on an ordinary autumn afternoon, one of those when the sky seems closer to the ground and the leaves dance in the air as if they knew that time, even when silent, is always in motion. He was a practical, observant man, possessed of a patience that couldn't be bought or taught, something that came from within, as if he knew that everything in life takes time. She, on the other hand, was made of urgency and intensity, spoke with her hands, felt with her heart open, and believed that love, to be real, needed to be great. When they first met, it seemed as if the world took a step back just so they could see each other properly. And they saw each other. Not just through the words exchanged or the shared tastes, but through that inexplicable feeling of already knowing each other, even though they were strangers. It didn't take long for them to become inseparable. Lucas admired the sparkle in Mariana's eyes when she talked about her dreams, the way she laughed, throwing her head back, the almost theatrical way she described everyday life as if it were a play. She, in turn, felt safe in his silence, in the calm with which he listened to each outburst of feeling without ever trying to suppress it, simply welcoming, understanding, offering an embrace that held the whole world. Their relationship blossomed naturally, like a house built piecemeal, each brick laid with intention. They shared first their time, then their space, and finally their plans. Together, they chose the apartment, the furniture, the wall colors, the paintings with phrases that today would seem naive, but at the time were declarations of eternity. Their love was forged in the sum of the details. In the coffee he brewed every morning and left beside her bed, even on days when she woke too late to drink it warm. In the short texts in the middle of the afternoon with a simple, "I miss you." In the habit of watching old movies on Sunday nights, even if she fell asleep halfway through and he feigned surprise at the end. In the trips to the grocery store hand in hand, in the arguments over which ice cream to buy, in the silent apologies that always came with a touch on the arm or a kiss on the shoulder. They weren't perfect, but they had learned to be one for each other. Lucas always said that loving Mariana was like living in a place where the windows were always open, there was a draft, sometimes it was cold, but the air was always fresh. Mariana, despite her impetuous manner, confessed to close friends that Lucas was the only place where she could rest. Over time, life took on new tones. Responsibilities increased, bills arrived more frequently, weekends began to get shorter. Mariana was promoted and threw herself headfirst into a new project that required extra nights at the office, quick trips, and after-hours meetings. Lucas understood, of course, always had, but little by little he began to feel that the woman who once ran into his arms at the end of the day was now rushing to answer calls. He tried not to judge, not to demand, not to turn love into pressure, but her absence, even when she was present, began to weigh heavily, as if the silence had taken shape. Mariana, in turn, felt pressured to meet new expectations at work while simultaneously maintaining the lightness of the relationship. She was tired, but didn't want to show it. She began to feign enthusiasm where she was exhausted, began to hide her frustrations for fear of appearing ungrateful. And without realizing it, they began to move away from each other along the banks, like two boats that had previously sailed side by side, but now, without realizing it, were heading in opposite directions. There was still love, and plenty of it. But there was also fatigue, misunderstandings, and a lack of time. Mariana would forget to let him know when she wouldn't be back for dinner. Lucas stopped asking, afraid of seeming controlling. She started going out more, always justifying it with company events, and he, though uncomfortable, remained silent, believing that trust was also a form of love. The conversations lost depth, the kisses became quicker, the hugs shorter. But no one yelled, no one fought. They were simply emptying themselves in silence, like someone losing blood without seeing the cut. The apartment, once full of laughter and complicity, was now a place where routines were maintained. Morning still had coffee, but it often went cold before anyone noticed. Sunday movies became background noise for constantly vibrating cell phones. Dinners were replaced by deliveries and silences. Lucas tried to keep what was left alive. He prepared small surprises, left notes, tried to propose short trips, weekends together, sincere conversations. But Mariana, even with good intentions, always seemed too far away. There was always something more urgent, more important, more necessary. Work, deadlines, commitments, fatigue. It wasn't heartbreak, it was distraction. But even distractions have consequences. He didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want her to feel guilty about growing up. But he began to wonder where he fit into her new life. Mariana, on her side, felt torn between what she was building and what she was losing, but believed she still had time to balance things. That soon, I would have room to breathe and love calmly again. Their wedding anniversary was approaching. Lucas, even though he'd been hurt by the distance of the past few months, believed that date could be a new beginning. He planned every detail with care. He chose the restaurant where they'd had their first date, called and cancelled at the last minute to prepare dinner himself, just the way she liked it. He bought fresh flowers, lit candles, and put on the playlist that always accompanied them on special occasions. He put on the shirt she'd once complimented, sprayed on perfume, and mentally rehearsed what he wanted to say, that he still believed in them, that it was still worth fighting for, that he still saw a future. But the hours passed. The candles began to melt. The wine grew cold. The food dried on the plates. And she didn't show up. Her phone was silent. The notifications stopped. The anguish grew. He looked at the door, then at the clock, then at the ring on his finger. What hurt wasn't just the absence. It was the realization that, at that crucial moment, he wasn't a priority. That perhaps he hadn't been for a long time. Mariana arrived late that night, but with a smile on her face. Carefree, as if she'd forgotten what was impossible to forget. And it was there, at that exact moment, that something inside Lucas broke. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hate. It was pure, raw, devastating disappointment. That silent pain that only abandonment disguised as routine can provoke. Life, after that night, would never be the same. What lay ahead would change the course of both of them forever. But at that moment, there had been no open betrayal. No secrets revealed. Just a love that was beginning to crumble from within, little by little, without explosions, without scandals. Like a sandcastle, beautiful at first glance, but too fragile before the tide of reality. The wind was already blowing, the water was already advancing, but there was still time to rebuild. Or so, at least, Lucas wanted to believe. And there, in the heart of that silent night, amidst wilted flowers, cold dishes, and a man who loved more than he knew how to show, began a story that would speak not only of love, but of its absence. A story of choice. Of renunciation. Of silence. Of loss. And of how, sometimes, what is destroyed with a gesture takes a lifetime to be forgiven. From that night on, something inside Lucas began to change silently, almost imperceptibly, like when the weather changes slowly and you only notice the cold when you're already shivering. He continued waking up early, making coffee, leaving for work, returning at the same time, fulfilling the rituals that were once gestures of affection and were now just attempts to keep something going. Mariana, for her part, seemed increasingly distant, wrapped up in commitments, in meetings that dragged on, in tired smiles and short answers. Her eyes, once so lively when they looked at him, now merely passed over him, as if seeing a shadow of someone who had once been there but no longer mattered. There was something different about her presence, and although she said nothing, the silence already carried answers he didn't want to formulate. Her phone, previously left on the table, was now always face down. The silent notifications, the hidden ringtones, the sudden departures to answer calls she claimed were work, always with a ready-made explanation. She spent more time getting ready, wearing new perfumes, lingerie that didn't suit the nights without ringing. Lucas didn't want to suspect, but everything in him screamed that something wasn't right. He tried to convince himself it was just a phase, that maybe she was just tired, overwhelmed, that the routine had taken away the spark that once illuminated them both. But then he noticed she was coming back lighter from the longer days, as if there existed somewhere a secret refuge she didn't want to share. He began to observe her more closely, not out of distrust, but out of fear. Fear of confirming what was already insinuating itself between the lines of every avoided conversation. Her messages were drier, her glances more fleeting. When he tried to talk about them, she changed the subject, saying she didn't want to turn the relationship into demands, that she loved him, yes, but she couldn't suffocate herself. Lucas never thought that loving too much could be suffocating. He began to feel that any attempt at closeness was treated as an invasion. His questions bothered her, his most affectionate gestures seemed to make her uncomfortable. One night, when he tried to hug her, she simply turned away and said she was tired. He lay awake for hours, listening to her breathing, trying to understand the exact moment they had stopped being each other's shelter. The days continued heavy, filled with unspoken words, restrained gestures, and frustrated attempts at rescue. Lucas began going out more, not for pleasure, but because he couldn't bear the weight of her absence in his own home. He walked the streets as if searching for something to remind him he was still alive. He stopped at lonely cafes, watched families passing by, couples arguing over trivial matters, and wondered at what point Mariana had stopped wanting to share her life with him. Those around him noticed the weariness in his eyes, the forced smile, the lowered tone of his voice. But no one knew how to ask, because some pains are only revealed in silence. It was then, one of those afternoons, that Lucas saw her leaving a restaurant they used to frequent together. She was with another man. They weren't holding hands, but the smiles between them were too intimate to be casual. She was laughing in a way he hadn't seen in months, her eyes shining as if she were rediscovering the world. The man, well-dressed, confident, seemed comfortable in that place where Lucas used to be the only one who knew her so well. There was no touch, no kiss, but what Lucas saw was enough to make something inside him truly shatter. He didn't confront her. Not that day. He returned home a stranger in his own skin, trying to understand if what he saw was truly what he feared or simply a reflection of what he had felt for so long. Mariana arrived late that night. He said he had a long meeting, that the traffic was unbearable, that he needed a shower and some quiet. He nodded silently, watching her take off her earrings in front of the mirror, as if nothing were happening. And that was when he understood. He didn't need to ask anymore, because the answer was already clear in her disinterest, in the way she avoided him, in how she no longer bothered to lie properly. The love that had existed between them was still there, but it was his alone. She had already left, only her body still inhabited the house. And the most painful thing was realizing she didn't feel guilty, or if she did, she knew how to hide it well. Lucas then withdrew. Not physically, but emotionally. He stopped trying, stopped insisting, stopped placing hope where there were only walls. He began to live on autopilot, slowly preparing himself for what was to come. The days went by like this, until the wedding anniversary came knocking. He hadn't planned anything. This time, there were no flowers, no wine, no special dinner. But he still set the table, as a silent gesture of farewell, like lighting a candle for a funeral ritual. She knew the date. He knew she knew. But when the night came, she appeared dressed as if she were going to something important, meticulously made up, perfumed with something new, smiling as if life were pulsing outside. She said she'd been invited to a dinner with the boss, that she couldn't miss it, that it was a matter of opportunity. Lucas didn't respond. He just watched her as she finished getting ready, grabbed her bag, and said she wouldn't be long. And she left. Without looking back. He stood there, staring at the set table, the lit candles, the untouched plate. He took the ring with the calm of someone signing a contract and placed it on the folded napkin. He sat, waited in silence. He watched the wax melt until it formed small puddles around the candlesticks. The clock ticked slowly. And then he stood, blew out the candles with a slow breath, and left without a sound. He walked through the empty streets as if he had just buried a part of himself. There were no more doubts, no more questions. Only the certainty that love, when not chosen, dies. And that day, he was left to die. Mariana returned in the early hours of the morning, still with the scent of the night on her body. She took off her heels and smiled, remembering a joke told at the dinner table. But her smile faded when she saw the set table, the candles already burned out, and the solitary ring. Her heart raced, her eyes searched the house, but he wasn't there. She called out to him, searched the bedrooms, the bathrooms, her cell phone, but there was no signal. The silence of the house was now hers. And it weighed heavily. She sat at the table, stared at the ring, and what had once been mere vanity became anguish. What had been just flirtation was now a consequence. And the choices, finally, began to show their true cost. She still tried to find him in the following days. She texted. She called. She showed up at his work once, unannounced. But he didn't want to talk anymore. There was no shouting, no hurt. Just absence. The absence that says it all when there's nothing left to say. She cried, screamed, blamed herself. But nothing could bring back what was left behind. Because what she didn't know is that the betrayal, for him, wasn't just the absence that night, but everything that came before, the little lies, the smiles that were no longer meant for him, the averted glances, the avoided touches. And it was then, in that emptiness, that Mariana understood she had crossed a line. One from which there would be no turning back. And what she didn't yet know was that there was something that would make everything even more final. A secret. Something that hadn't been told, something hidden among the details of the new life she was trying to build. Something that, when it came to light, would show that losing Lucas wasn't just a consequence, but justice. Mariana spent the days following Lucas's absence as if she had awakened from an emotional coma, as if she had finally understood that what had seemed safe was no longer there. Every corner of the house seemed to breathe his presence, even though he would never return. The objects they had once shared now stared at her with the coldness of inanimate objects, colorless, lifeless. The half-empty closet, the missing toothbrush from the bathroom, the absence of his perfume on the pillow, everything hurt like a knife slowly sinking in. With each unanswered attempt to contact her, her desperation grew. It was no longer pride, nor defense, but pleading. She called incessantly, leaving messages, trying to rebuild with words what she had destroyed with her actions. But Lucas remained absent, silent. It wasn't an escape. It was peace. The peace of someone who had loved until the end, to the limit, and for that very reason, had the right to leave. And he left. Discreetly, without fanfare. He restarted his life like someone relearning to walk after a bad fall. The first steps were uncertain but firm. He changed houses, neighborhoods, routines. He allowed himself to meet new people, but with the care of someone who has been wounded in the heart. Until he met someone. Someone different from Mariana in almost every way, but similar in one essential, the ability to care. With her, love didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't get lost in waiting. It was simple. Present. Daily. The new woman in his life didn't ask for proof, didn't play charades, didn't measure strength. And that was what won him over. With her, he could laugh again without guilt, sleep without anxiety, dream of the future without fear of abandonment. She chose him, every day, without needing set dates or empty justifications. The past with Mariana became a painful but distant memory. Until it stopped hurting. On the other side, Mariana lived a routine of guilt and emptiness. The other man, the one who had clouded her reason, had disappeared as easily as he had appeared. There was no drama. Only distance. He never promised anything, she was the one who fantasized. She began to live with regret, trying at all costs to rescue herself from the mistake that now consumed her. And every year, on the anniversary of her now-defunct wedding, she repeated the same ritual, table set, candle lit, wine in the glass. As if she could undo what had been done. As if he could still return. It was one of those years that Lucas finally responded. After so many failed attempts, he agreed to meet her. Not out of longing, but for closure. He arrived with the serene demeanor of someone who had already made peace with the past. Mariana received him nervously, her eyes teary, her heart racing. She asked for forgiveness. She spoke of everything she felt, of how she realized too late what she had lost. He listened in silence. He waited for her to finish, and then spoke, in a low but firm voice, that he forgave her. But that forgiveness didn't mean returning. That love couldn't endure alone. And that now, he had found someone who made him feel seen, valued, chosen. Mariana broke down in front of him, crying like she had never cried before, but he remained calm. When she asked if he still loved her, he hesitated for a second, and replied that he had loved her very much, but now he loved her elsewhere, with someone else. And that was the moment when the penny dropped. That his pride melted. That she truly understood that she had lost him. Days later, on her own birthday, she planned a small celebration. She invited a few friends, people from work, neighbors. Deep down, she wanted him to show up. She sent a discreet invitation, almost like a cry for help. He didn't respond. The party went ahead, but she barely paid attention. She was waiting for him. Until, late in the evening, when there were no more guests, no music, no laughter, just her and the echo of what never came back, the doorman called and said they'd left something for her. An envelope, small, delicate. Inside was a single flower. White. The same one she'd used in her wedding bouquet. And next to the flower, a handwritten note, so you never forget what true love was. Mariana held the flower to her face, trying to hold back the tears, but it was impossible. The flower had scent, memory, weight. It was the reminder of what she had destroyed with her own hands. She sat on the sofa, crying silently, until the phone rang. She answered, her voice still cracking. It was a mutual friend. Someone who had been part of her relationship with Lucas from the beginning. Someone who, unknowingly, would complete the final blow. The friend, unaware of the gift, said she had recently met Lucas again at a cafe. She said he seemed like a different man. Happy. Renewed. Beside a sweet, kind woman who treated him with respect and affection. A woman who held his hand lightly, who smiled at him as if he were everything. Mariana listened silently, feeling her throat tighten. But that wasn't what destroyed her. What crushed her was what came next. The friend commented that, coincidentally, Lucas's new companion was an old acquaintance. Someone Mariana, years ago, had ridiculed at an event. A woman who politely tried to talk to her, but Mariana treated her with contempt, feeling superior, being on the boss's side, feeling too powerful to care. This woman, according to her friend, was now Lucas's wife. The woman he chose to share his life with. The one Mariana ignored, mocked, and dismissed as irrelevant. She was the one who now slept beside him. Who drank coffee with him. Who received the love that was once hers. Mariana felt her entire body freeze. The memory came like an avalanche. She remembered the occasion. The arrogance. The cruel words spoken with a mocking smile. And now, this woman was Lucas's new home. And she, Mariana, was just an uncomfortable memory in his past. She cried until she fell asleep with the flower in her arms. For the pain of having lost the man who still loved her when she ignored him. For the knowledge that he didn't leave out of revenge, but because he was finally loved as he deserved. And for knowing that life, silently, had given him back everything she destroyed, but by other hands. Nothing was said after that. There were no messages, no reunions. Just emptiness. Mariana now visits the same restaurant where they celebrated their first wedding anniversary every year. She sits alone, orders his favorite dish, watches the couples around her. And waits. Not for him, but for a time that will never return. That note with the flower remains in a box, along with old photos and what's left of the ring. She rereads it from time to time. And always cries. Because now she understands that some choices are final. And that sometimes, losing the love of your life, is the price for not being loved back when there was still time. That night, after the phone call that revealed a truth more painful than any betrayal, Mariana lay motionless on the sofa, the flower lying beside her and the note crumpled between her fingers. She no longer cried, no longer sobbed, just remained there, sunk in a heavy silence, as if the world around her had been forcibly removed. Something inside her had broken in a different way, deeper, more devastating, as if she had finally understood that the real pain wasn't the loss of a man, but the loss of the version of herself that existed when she was still worthy of his love. For the first time in a long time, she didn't think about how to make amends, how to apologize, how to win him back. She simply accepted it. She felt it. And it was there, in that surrender, that the truth took its final form. She was no longer part of his story. The following days were lived like an echo. The house, already silent, now felt like a tomb. Mariana avoided rooms that held vivid memories, began sleeping on the couch to avoid facing the empty bed, stopped cooking, stopped getting ready, stopped trying to look good. Friends asked, tried to pull her back to the surface, but she refused any kind of distraction. It was as if I had entered an intimate, solitary mourning for everything that was still alive in memory but dead in reality. The image of Lucas holding another woman's hand, laughing with her, making plans with her, replayed in her mind like a constant punishment. The fact that this woman was someone she herself had rejected and humiliated only made it crueler. Because Mariana knew this wasn't just an ironic coincidence, it was a mirror. Life had confronted her with her own arrogance, the vanity that blinded her, the absurd certainty that Lucas would never leave. But the pain didn't just remain a memory. A month after that lonely birthday, she saw him. By chance. She was leaving a bookstore when she spotted Lucas crossing the street with his new wife. They didn't seem rushed, they weren't holding hands like lovesick teenagers, but there was something about the way they walked together that hurt more than any public display of affection. It was the silent companionship, the harmony of their steps, the slight smile when she whispered something in his ear. Mariana retreated into the store, hiding behind the nearest shelf. And there she stood, watching from afar as if watching a film about the life she'd lost. When he looked away and smiled, Mariana recognized that look. It was the same one he used to give her years ago. But now it wasn't hers anymore. It never would be again. She decided not to run anymore. Not to hide her face, not to avoid the discomfort. She left the store and went to the cafe on the corner, sat by the window, and stood there, waiting for fate to pass her by again. And it did. Lucas saw her. He paused for a second. His new wife noticed, turned her face, and recognized her too. There was a moment suspended in time. Mariana didn't know if she should wave, stand, or leave. But Lucas simply bowed his head slightly in politeness. A polite, almost cold gesture. Without resentment, but also without affection. And he continued on his way. Hand in hand with the other woman. Mariana felt her stomach sink. Not because of his coldness, but because of the certainty that this was the definitive answer. He saw her now as a stranger. Someone who had once existed, but no longer belonged to any future chapter. That night, alone at home, she decided to write. Not a letter to him. But to herself. She filled entire pages with questions, memories, laments, trying to find in each word the woman she had been and let disappear. She wrote about the fear she felt, about the pride that destroyed what could still have been saved, about the days when Lucas begged for attention with gestures and she responded with absences. For the first time, she admitted to herself that it wasn't work, her boss, or circumstances that drove her away from him, it was choice. The deliberate choice to feed her vanity, to test the limits of those who loved her unconditionally, to believe that true love endures everything. It endures a lot, but not neglect. And Mariana was negligent. With him. With the relationship. With her own future. Shortly thereafter, she decided to do something she'd never considered. She scheduled a meeting with Lucas's new wife. Not to beg for anything. But because she needed to understand. She needed, perhaps, to face the love that had replaced hers. Her new wife, surprised, accepted. They met at a discreet cafe, hidden from view. The woman arrived punctually, unassuming, and serene. Mariana was nervous but maintained her composure. When they sat down, there was a heavy silence. Until Mariana said she just wanted to listen, just wanted to understand what had won his heart, what had made Lucas love again. The woman took a deep breath. She said Lucas came to her broken. That it took a long time for him to open up. That it took patience to make him believe again. She said he rarely spoke about the past, but always made it clear that he had truly loved before, and that it was this love that taught him not to accept less than he deserved. Mariana listened silently, her heart aching. The woman didn't speak with resentment. On the contrary. There was even empathy in her tone. She said she didn't feel like a rival, nor a winner. Because the love they built was new, not a competition. Mariana held back tears, thanked her for her honesty, and before leaving, asked her what she felt when she discovered she was that woman from the event, the same one who had been treated arrogantly. Her answer came with a restrained smile, I felt that sometimes time knows what it does. On the way home, Mariana looked out the car window as if observing a world that no longer belongs to her. She now understood that asking for forgiveness doesn't always mean starting over. That some mistakes can't be erased, only understood. And that, perhaps, the greatest punishment for a wrong choice is watching from the outside the love that was once hers blossom elsewhere. A few months passed. Mariana moved to another city. She didn't run away. She simply tried to start over, far from her memories. She carried the note and the dried flower inside a book with her as a daily reminder. She began working less intensely, sought therapy, and reconnected with old friends. She tried to rebuild herself slowly, without illusions. And although she sometimes dreamed of him, of their old house, of the Sundays they slept in each other's embrace without a care, she woke knowing that all that was in another life. One she herself let die. Lucas, on the other hand, lived his new beginning with determination. He was married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by people who knew the pain he carried. In his speech, he didn't talk about the past. He simply thanked her for the new chance at happiness. His eyes spoke more than any words. He was no longer the man Mariana had abandoned. He was a different man. Stronger. More whole. And now, finally, at peace. And so, without grand explosions, without exaggerated revenge, life went on. As it always does. Each person makes their own choices, their own consequences, their own scars. Mariana didn't just lose a love. She lost time, the versions of herself that only existed by his side, the possibility of a story that now lives in another heart. And Lucas, in turn, found in the end what everyone seeks, someone who, among all the options, chose him back. Not out of convenience, nor vanity. But out of love. A love that arrived after the pain, but that came to stay. Time passed with a calculated slowness, as if knowing the weight each minute carried for Mariana. There was no more rushing, no more meetings, no more the tight schedule that once occupied every corner of her mind. There was only silence and space. Too much space. The mornings seemed long, the nights eternal. The new house, though smaller and more practical, echoed what had been left behind. She took almost nothing from her old life. A few clothes, a few books, and a box of photographs she hadn't yet dared to open. Work, even in a new city, continued under her responsibility, but now with a different, less urgent pace. She was no longer driven by ambition or vanity. She did what needed to be done, without the sparkle in her eyes that had once driven her. Mariana was rediscovering the weight of calm, of spare time, of invading thoughts. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, he would go for a walk without direction. He passed cafes where couples laughed carefree, families gathered in squares, people saying goodbye and others reuniting. He observed it all with a mixture of nostalgia and admiration. He had lived through it all before, and he had also let it all slip through his fingers. There was no longer anger, no revolt, no desire for return. Only a raw, harsh, but real acceptance. The acceptance that love, once broken from within, may leave a memory, but it doesn't rebuild roots. And the love she lost wasn't ordinary, wasn't fragile. It was one of those rare ones that persists even when the other gives up. But she didn't know how to choose when it mattered most. And now, she reaped the silence of thoughtless decisions. On one of those silent afternoons, she decided to open the box she'd been carrying for months without touching it. She sat on the floor, crossed her legs, and carefully removed the photos. Each one told a story she tried to forget. The genuine smiles, the knowing glances, the impromptu trips, the lazy breakfasts, the birthdays, the small achievements celebrated in silence. There was no luxury, no ostentation. Everything was simple, but everything was whole. And there, in each photo, Mariana rediscovered pieces of herself she'd thought lost. She felt a pang of guilt realizing how she'd abandoned everything for something she didn't even know existed today. The vanity of yesteryear now seemed ridiculous, the empty compliments, the manufactured admiration, everything so small compared to what she held in her hands and took for granted. She decided to write again. But this time, not to you. She wrote a letter addressed to Lucas, not to win him back, but to somehow return what he'd left behind. She didn't expect a reply, didn't expect him to read it aloud, or even keep it. She simply wanted to deliver it. She said she'd loved him badly, that she hadn't known how to care for him, that she'd confused independence with indifference. She confessed she'd lost herself in a world of illusions and only realized it when it was too late. And she thanked him. She thanked him for having been loved sincerely, for having received more than she'd given, for having learned from the loss what she'd ignored during her inauguration. At the end, she signed with the same simple name he used when referring to her, Mari. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope with no return address. He had it delivered to his work, without any additional income. Just that. Just what was left. Lucas received the letter on a rainy morning. It had been months since he'd heard from Mariana. The new routine with his wife filled his life with solidity, tranquility, and uneventfulness. He had discovered, with her, a new form of love. One that didn't depend on grand gestures, but on constancy. Reading that letter was like opening a forgotten window in a room that had been locked for security. He felt no anger, no longing. He felt respect. For her, for himself, for everything they'd experienced. That letter sealed, with words, what he had already closed with silence. He folded it again and put it away in a drawer he rarely opened. Not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition that certain chapters, though completed, are still part of the book. The following week, something drew him to the city where Mariana now lived. A work conference for his new wife. He accompanied her, not out of obligation, but out of pleasure. While she attended the lectures, he walked through the unfamiliar streets. Until, passing a small park, he saw her sitting on a bench, reading. Mariana was different. Thinner, perhaps, or just more serene. Her hair tied back simply, her gaze focused. For a second, he considered continuing. But his feet stopped. She saw him. They stared at each other for a few seconds. Until he approached. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. There were no tears, no pleas. Just two adults facing the consequences of their choices. Mariana closed the book, stood gently, and smiled, a smile that asked for nothing. Lucas returned the gesture lightly. They talked for a few minutes. About the weather, the city, trivialities. They avoided the past. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the present. He told her about the new phase. She said she was trying to reconnect with herself. And then, silence fell. A comfortable silence. As if everything that needed to be said was already contained in that moment. Before they said goodbye, Mariana held out her hand. Lucas held it tightly, and for a moment, they both closed their eyes. It wasn't love, it wasn't hurt, it wasn't regret. It was the realization that, even with all the pain, they were still grateful to have found each other one day. He said he wished her well. She replied that she now knew how to take care of herself. And then, with one last look, he turned and left. Unhurriedly. Without turning back. That night, Mariana didn't cry. She went to bed early, read a few more pages of the book, and fell asleep feeling that, for the first time in a long time, everything was where it should be. Lucas, beside his new wife, felt light-hearted. There were no ghosts, no loose ends. There was only the certainty that she had done the right thing. And that, despite the past, there was still room for hope. But not every story ends peacefully. Sometimes, what seems over still holds one final twist. And even when everything seems resolved, fate finds a way to test how much we've learned from our losses. The end was near. But there was still something left to be said. Something that would forever change how that story would be remembered. Mariana spent days reliving that brief reunion as if she had watched a scene from a movie she was no longer a part of. The way Lucas looked at her, with kindness and distance, was more painful than any shout or accusation could have been. It was as if he had, in fact, crossed a bridge of no return, and now she only saw him from afar, dwarfed by the horizon he had chosen. She tried not to romanticize that moment, tried not to cling to the light touch of their hands or the shared silence, but the truth is that, in that instant, something closed inside her. Not with anger, nor despair, but with a strange serenity. It was as if the universe, for a second, had allowed them to close a cycle, not with promises, but with presence. In the following days, Mariana focused on starting over in a way she had never attempted before, unhurriedly, without goals, without seeking to replace the void that had been left behind. She began participating in cultural gatherings, returned to drawing, an old habit she had abandoned in her youth, and allowed herself to wander through new places without the desire to lose herself, but with the curiosity to rediscover herself. There was still a persistent loneliness, but it no longer hurt in the same way. It was a more conscious, more chosen solitude. A kind of silence she learned to respect. One day, while sorting through old papers, she found an unsent letter. It was from Lucas, written during a time when they were still together but growing apart. His words were tender, full of attempts at reconnection, and yet there was a sadness embedded in every line. He spoke of how much he missed her presence, even when she still slept beside him, spoke of the pain of talking to himself between the lines of messages she didn't read carefully, and confessed his fear that she no longer loved him. Mariana read each paragraph as if he were there, beside her, saying it all in a low voice, and when she finished, she realized the paper was trembling in her hands. That letter was a kind of ghost, a living reminder that he had tried, that he had struggled, that she simply hadn't heard him in time. It didn't change the present, but it made her understand the past even more. And with that, Mariana felt the need to do something, not for him, but for herself. Later that month, she was invited to give a talk at a local university about female leadership and career development. She had initially resisted the idea, thinking she was no longer a role model, but she accepted. She prepared honestly, and upon taking the stage, for the first time, she spoke about something she had never shared in public: the price of confusing success with disconnection, the illusion of thinking it was possible to maintain an entire personal life while putting off affection for later, as if there were always time for love. She spoke without naming names, but opened wounds that had been hidden until then. When she finished, she received a standing ovation. But the greatest recognition came later, when a young woman approached her, tears in her eyes, and said she was about to repeat the same mistakes. Mariana held her hand and said that love is not an obstacle to growth, but its fuel. She said that being chosen every day by someone is the kind of success that no promotion can replace. And in that moment, he felt that he was finally giving back to the world what he had learned from his own pain. Meanwhile, Lucas lived a new routine with intensity and calm. With his wife, he shared his life in a relaxed yet fulfilling way. They shared plans, faced simple everyday challenges, and laughed over trivialities. He wasn't the same man Mariana had known. There was more maturity in every gesture, less urgency, more discernment. The pain of the past had been processed, but still existed as a memory. Sometimes, silently, he reflected on how much one choice changes the course of everything. Not with regret, but with a very clear awareness that life, when turned in the wrong directions, can lead to completely different destinies. He was happy, at peace, but he didn't forget. And he didn't need to forget to move forward. That's what made him even more whole. On a long weekend, they traveled to a small town in the countryside, seeking peace and quiet. They rented a simple house surrounded by mountains and silence. There, amidst books, wine, and long conversations, Lucas confessed to his wife that he had reunited with Mariana. She showed neither jealousy nor discomfort. She listened attentively and lovingly. He explained that it was brief, that there were no promises, just necessary closure. His wife smiled and said she was proud to be with someone capable of dealing with the past with such dignity. She thanked him for being chosen every day. He embraced her silently, and in that embrace, there was a complicity that could not be explained, only felt. In the other city, Mariana continued her journey of reconstruction. She returned to visiting her family, something she had neglected for years. She reconnected with people who knew her before the chaos, and with them, she rediscovered forgotten parts of herself. With each encounter, she realized how much she had transformed. She no longer sought blame or avoided questions. She courageously owned up to the mistakes she had made. And in doing so, she felt freer. She knew the past would never disappear, but she also knew it no longer needed to dictate her steps. One afternoon, while walking along the lakeshore near her home, she saw an elderly couple sitting on a bench, sharing an ice cream cone and laughing softly. It touched her unexpectedly. She sat on another bench, where she could observe them from afar, and for the first time, she envisioned the future she had once wanted for herself, a simple future, filled with everyday love, made of little things. And in that moment, she understood that the most tragic thing was not losing Lucas, but losing the chance to grow old with someone who would have made every stage of life a home. She cried, but it was a different kind of cry. There was no despair, no heaviness. It was a tear of grief, yes, but also of gratitude. Because, deep down, she knew, she had the chance to experience a great love. And even though she failed, she still had it. On her way home, she found an envelope in her mailbox with no return address. She opened it curiously, and inside was only a small card with a handwritten phrase, "Some flowers grow from seeds that time buries, but the wind still scatters." There was no signature. But she recognized the handwriting. It was Lucas's. Not as a new beginning, but as a final gesture. A symbol that, even when everything changes, there are marks that time cannot erase. And she kept the card next to the dried flower and the letter he never sent. Not out of longing, but out of respect for the story he had lived. Because now she knew, to love is also to accept that the end can be the purest of beginnings, even if it is not ours. Autumn arrived early that year, as if time also wanted to accelerate the cycle of things, as if the wind carrying dry leaves wanted to sweep away what no longer belonged to that time. And it was in this climate of transition that the story slowly began to find its end. An end that didn't come with promises or reunions, but with respected silences and choices maintained. Lucas continued with his new life, not as a man who had won a battle, but as someone who understood the value of not insisting where love was no longer cultivated. Alongside the woman who welcomed him when he was nothing but shards, he built a true home, where affection didn't need to be asked for, where presence was constant, and where loyalty was the foundation, not a bargaining chip. They didn't live a movie-like passion, they didn't make grandiose declarations, but they were there, every day, for each other, with the calm of those who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He never needed to tell his wife about the letter Mariana replied to their reunion, nor about the card he sent anonymously as a delicate final point. She never asked. Because mature love doesn't demand explanations for everything, it trusts in what is cultivated with truth. Lucas found the peace he always sought, not in promises of eternity, but in the present well-lived. And it was thus, in silence, that he finally freed himself from the past. Mariana, on the other hand, continued her journey of reconstruction. There were no more hidden expectations, no silent plans to regain what she had lost. The reunion with Lucas, the final gestures, the serene gaze he gave her, all of this served as a mirror and also as a boundary. She understood that the guilt she carried could no longer define her, that she had lost, yes, but she didn't need to lose herself with it. Over time, she transformed her story into a lecture, then an article, and finally, a small book she published independently. The title was simple but powerful, The Things That Don't Come Back. She didn't name names or reveal intimate details, but on every page she carried the pain, the awareness, and the dignity of those who fell and decided not to stay down. The work found readers who saw themselves reflected in her words, and for the first time in a long time, Mariana felt that her pain had served something greater than herself. On a cloudy afternoon, she was invited to participate in a panel discussion about relationships and emotional reconstruction. At the end of the event, a woman in the audience asked for the microphone and said, with a choked voice, that she was about to destroy her own marriage, caught up in a game of vanity very similar to the one Mariana had described in her book. And that, thanks to her words, she decided to stop before it was too late. Mariana listened with a heavy heart, but also with gratitude. For the first time, she understood that, although she couldn't change the past, she could still be a bridge of transformation for others. And in that moment, even without knowing it, she found new meaning in everything she had experienced. But fate sometimes has a subtle and cruel way of reminding us that scars still remain, barely healed. One rainy morning, while drinking coffee in a discreet cafe, Mariana heard familiar laughter coming from the table next door. Unintentionally, she recognized Lucas's voice. She turned slowly and saw him, sitting with his wife and a small child in his arms, a girl who must have been 2 or 3 years old, smiling, with eyes very similar to his. Mariana felt the world spin for a second. She hadn't known he had children. And it wasn't the fact itself that hurt, but the silent realization that his life had continued in so many layers that now she didn't even recognize it. It was no longer a story with an ending. It was a new book, with new chapters, in which she wasn't even among the footnotes. She lowered her eyes and smiled slightly, in silent acknowledgement of the passage of time. Lucas didn't see her. And she didn't want him to. When she left the cafe, something inside her had reorganized. It was no longer pain, nor regret. It was just life moving forward, waiting for no one. And it was with this lightness that Mariana, that very day, decided to change the destination of a trip she had planned months before. Instead of visiting the old haunts she and Lucas frequented, she chose a new country. A place she had never been, where there were no memories to hurt. She traveled alone. And during that trip, she met new people, had new experiences, and for the first time, she allowed herself to be seen differently. No longer as the woman she had lost, but as the woman who had decided to learn. And there, among strangers and unseen landscapes, Mariana discovered a new version of herself. One she still didn't know if she would ever love again, but one that, above all, she respected. Time marched on, as it always does. Lucas continued building his family serenely, watching his daughter grow up, learning from his wife that love can be a constant and silent choice. He was happy. Not euphorically, but wholeheartedly. Mariana published a second book, this time fiction, but inspired by her journey. It became a subtle reference for many women who carried the same stifled pain of having let go of what they loved most out of pride, distraction, or arrogance. They never saw each other again. They never exchanged words. But they both knew, somewhere deep down, that the story they lived had left eternal marks. Not the kind that hurt, but the kind that transform. And that's how this story ends. With irreparable losses, but also with possible new beginnings. Because betrayal doesn't just destroy the bond between two people, it devastates respect, erodes good memories, and pushes feelings into the abyss of doubt. It hurts not only in the act, but in the days that follow, in the empty nights, in the words that will never make sense again. Mariana discovered this too late. Lucas, with his pain, chose to move on. And moving on, sometimes, is the most courageous act of self-love anyone can perform. If you've made it this far, now it's your turn. Comment below with your thoughts on this story. What part touched you most? Which character did you understand best? What would you do in their shoes? Your opinion is crucial and will help the channel continue to bring you stories that move you, make you think, and most importantly, leave a lasting impression. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories like this, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Because maybe, out there, someone is about to make a choice that could change everything, and a good story might be just what's needed to make them think. And finally, a reminder, this channel does not support or justify any type of betrayal. The stories we tell here are fiction created to reflect reality and show, with all its pain and consequences, how betrayal destroys homes, dreams, and true loves. May it serve as a lesson. May it serve as a warning. And, above all, may it serve as a mirror. Because love, when well cared for, doesn't need special dates. It just needs to be chosen every day.